Hi, everybody. Welcome back. My name is Carol Williams, and with me again, I have Karthik. Karthik, say hi.
Hello, everyone. Glad to be here again. And now it's great to continue our conversation with you, Carol, in terms of what now process, practice, and everything about ERM.
That's right. We're going to talk more about the value-based ERM that we got into in our last conversation, which I think was fantastic for people to be able to hear. The sticking point that so happens with a lot of ERM programs and practices is how the practitioner is interacting with the leadership and getting their leadership mindset in the right place. I won't say get it right, but get it in the right place
Right.
to really demonstrate the value of ERM. So before we talk practices, process, all of that, let's talk how the practitioner
Mhm.
should be interacting with leadership in that value-based world that you are so familiar with.
Absolutely. So I would say first things first, as risk management as a practice is to enable better informed decision making. And who makes the decisions is the business leaders, the frontline people in the business who make the decisions. So, in my humble opinion, the job of a good ERM practice is to be behind the scenes and enable these decision makers take well informed decisions, looking at both the downsides as well as the upside.
Mhm.
So, how we do about it, we spoke about a lot of different frameworks. There are different ways to go about doing it. But in the end of the day, you work with individuals, leaders who drive the business, have a clear objective, and what's the most efficient way for them to go about executing their plan, and how where ERM kind of gets into this.
So that's a great point in that there are a ton of frameworks out there. So if we and 100% agree, it is about how ERM can support that decision-making process. Because if you don't support that process, there's no value add for the business. So in your experience, Karthik, how have you seen ERM being able to successfully work behind the scenes to support that decision making and how the conversations that you end up having with those business leaders.
Absolutely. Again, no one size fits all approach here right now. Um, the the most fun part of working in enterprise risk management is how dynamic it gets and how within the same organization, when leadership styles differ or change, how you kind of change the course on how you go about now executing the plan. But first thing again, to kind of break down into smaller pieces of now how we go about doing it is the most critical or the bedrock of doing this is to have that line of sight to strategy and the purpose. So kind of put it into two buckets. Same concept what we spoke about in the earlier episode is value creation and value preservation, right?
Mhm.
So any business plan, take it. Now, depending on if it's going to be a rolling plan or if it's going to be, say, a 10-year plan that some organization is working towards to, you break down into parts. How are we going to go about achieving that? Who gets to do what? And how are they going to get measured if they are doing it in the right way or the preferred way, right? Having that line of sight and kind of breaking that down into executable task and then assigning kind of creating a complex matrix of risk to task to that overall vision is the most fun part I enjoy doing in this role, right? So when you talk to, say, uh, sales head, to a finance head, to a HR head, to the legal person. Each of these functions have a part in executing the plan for the organization, right? And
Right.
each of them have a specific mandate. The more clear the goal is, for the organization and the more clear the goal is for each of these functions and how are they going to get measured. And then risk by itself, I wouldn't say it's a piece of the puzzle. Rather, it should be the glue that kind of puts everything together. It needs to permeate across different functions, different goals, and kind of provide that line of sight to the strategy.
So I want to go back because a lot of my readers and people watching are very familiar with the objective centric way of me talking. So if we talk about strategic objectives and business objectives to align it to what you talked about, value preservation is going back to business objectives, the everyday alignment up to mission critical objectives. And then value creation is alignment with strategic objectives, where you're adding on to the value of the organization. So, not to get confused with the value add ERM, right? That we always
No.
talk about. We're talking about organizational value.
Exactly.
So,
Shareholder value, organizational value, or larger stakeholder values.
yes. Okay. So keeping that in mind, absolutely, we talk about objective owners. So your business leaders, they have a role. Who was responsible? Who's gonna, if you had to think about a RACI chart, who's the R? Who was being held responsible for
Hmm.
this objective? That's your objective owner, which is the same thing of what you're talking about, of identifying who was responsible for these elements within it. But you're actually getting into some of the more nuanced thing to getting into some of
Exactly.
the projects and tasks within the strategy or
Right.
within the business day-to-day workings.
Right. And and
Okay.
and it and it can be like now, let's say if it's a global matrix organization, they have different regions, different businesses, and now each have their own set targets, and all that kind of culminate into at the holding company level, right? So for each of those tasks, they need to go about doing certain things. And when you draw up a plan, you have in mind certain baseline assumptions, right? Worked for longest time with now financial services. So the key things internally and externally that influences, we have set assumptions. What will be the interest rates? Now, what will be the now foreign exchange rate between US dollar to say euro, yen, and how that is going to impact our asset portions? Where do we expect S&P or Dow Jones to be, right? What do we expect our attrition or retention rate will be? Where in which market segment, how much do we expect to grow? And there's a rationale behind all those assumptions. So that's what we call as a baseline, right? So that gets broken down into different business functions in terms of who's going to do what. Let's say technology spend. If you have, say, $25 million for your technology spend, where is that kind of linked into? So probably you want to kind of upgrade your frontline systems. That is critical to sales. So it's kind of all interlinked, right? So when you kind of talk about risk, then you talk about what could go well, what might not go well, and what's the bandwidth, right? If this, I'm taking a simple example. Let's say now let's take the most least quantifiable risk again here. Let's say retention rate. Let's say HR head thinks that a healthy retention rate for the organization is somewhere between 7 to 10%, depending on what the organization is. If and now historic trend where you want to grow, now probably you are upskilling, so you're kind of comfortable. The baseline plan is 7 to 10%. What happens if that 10%, like what are the factors that influence this? If it goes beyond 10%, then what happens? If it goes below 7%, which is now zero, attrition is not good as well, which means you're carrying some weight with you. I know it's not coming at the right time talking about this, but that's how organizations think, right? The least 5% of your performing employees, you don't want them because they kind of hold you back from where you think, no, they are not enabling you to create that value. So when you talk about these things through the, no, it's like risk, but you don't talk about risk. You talk about more of, what are the things each of the functions need to do, what will hold them back, what is the minimum risk that they need to take. And this goes back to our earlier episode where we spoke about what's the floor and what's the ceiling within which each function or each business needs to operate so that you stay on course to achieve that strategy. Um, And then you create quantifiable drivers for each of this. This goes back to attaching to the drivers of the business, right? Irrespective of how vast the organization is, you will have anywhere between, say, high single digits to mid two digit business drivers. And if you, the fun part is when you put everything together, it kind of is a close resemblance of a balanced scorecard. How you measure the business performance through the lens of risk and what are the things, who's controlling what, and how do you measure it and then report on it. So enterprise risk reporting, both to the leadership and at a board level, happens more of a performance evaluation of the business and kind of talking through it. It's just not talking about who's doing well. That's not what we want. We want why certain things are happening, what went well and why, what did not go well and why, and what do we expect based on the facts that we know. And that's where kind of balance between the value preservation, what is the existing shareholder value that we already have, and what are the things we are doing to kind of preserve that, and where is value being created, and what are the things we need to do. So it is a continuing conversation, both at the leadership level as well as at the board level.
Okay. Ooh, that's a lot to unpack. Holy smokes. Okay, so I want to go back to that idea of the scorecard because I think there's some people that um, they at a high level know what a balanced scorecard is, meaning business metrics, right? But there's a very specific way of building a balanced scorecard, and how you look at it and the four areas that you look at. But it is all going back to business metrics, which goes back to there's quantifiable evidence of things going well, things not going well.
Mm-hmm.
So in our past conversation, we did talk about that range because we talked about guardrails, right?
Right,
The business should be achieving within this acceptable range. And once it starts going outside of that range, then that's when you start getting the the red flags of something's not going the way that it should be.
right.
So if we were to take the image of a balanced scorecard and the four quadrants, if that's how we're supposed to be communicating about risk to leadership, how have you seen it communicated well within that kind of structure? Like what would actually appear in those four quadrants?
I would say now, if you can we take a pause, Carol?
Mhm. Okay, so when we you mentioned the balanced scorecard. Now, based on what you're saying, though, it sounds like it's not just like the balanced scorecard. There's a difference in ERM and how we should be supporting the business leaders. So, can you describe what the like business card, like
Absolutely.
what does
Uh,
that look like? I'm a visual person. Describe it in
Right,
visuals.
absolutely. So when we define risk, right, now we kind of put it under three buckets. Like now, risk is anything that is uncertain. Now, that is anything not already part of the plan, or more like a shift from the plan. And third is you talk about both upside and downside. And this exactly looks that way, right? So for each of the, so let's say now for the organization, we have something called SMART goals, which is like now specific, measurable, actionable, reportable, and tangible. So for each of those goals, then we kind of have a three-column reporting in terms of things that are within our expectations as what we kind of drew up in the plan, right? Let's say if you want your asset portfolio to grow somewhere between 4 to 6%, and that's exactly where it is, how it is grown in the last quarter, and how it is expected to grow in the next quarter, then you put that in within that expected range, right? On the one side, you have where things are going below your expectations and reasons or attributes that are kind of driving that. On the other side, you have things that are going way better than expectation and reasons and attributes that is driving that. And all these are connected to the business drivers or the risk drivers of the business. So what it makes available is the entire plan that's broken down into different business functions and support functions, and what are their expectations kind of working towards the plan, and how they have each of them have been performing. And two, it kind of creates a standard, I would say, baseline for conversation to happen, right? So, how is the business performing? Who is contributing to what? What are the internal factors that are driving it? What are the external factors driving it? So, when you kind of talk about business performance using these lens, then people have a minimum standard understanding of what is happening with the business, internal and external, who's doing what, who needs more support, who where we kind of are in autopilot mode, so that now you don't need to put any more focus or resources, but then also look at the metrics to kind of keep looking at monitoring where things are doing okay. What it enables is it enables having a dialogue between peers at a leadership level as well as with the higher up. And when the board looks at it, it's kind of broken down into simple, understandable, now actionable points in terms of what is happening and why it is happening. And behind the scenes is where risk is kind of building that framework and maintaining it.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, that was extremely helpful. I can see the three columns now. Okay, went as expected and did not go as expected, both good
Right,
and bad.
right.
And we've actually, I've written an article on positive risk, and people are like, "What? What?" Yeah, where things go so great, but there is some risk associated with it going so great as well,
Exactly. Exactly.
because it didn't go as planned. But then there's also the bad risk, and so that's also part of the reason why I tell people don't just use the word risk in a conversation, because everybody has a different meaning in their head. And a lot of people skew towards it only means negative, bad things happening.
Right.
And it does not only mean that, but for a lot of people in their head, it does. So, how can we keep it from doing that way? And that's not use the word risk. And instead, let's talk about what's expected, what's not expected. Exactly. And I love having the why behind
Yeah.
it. I'm a
Right.
big fan of why. Um, understanding those root causes behind it.
And I think that's kind of now a key purpose in my experience, what I've gained to understand. But that's the utility that risk provides to the decision makers to kind of make them better understand the whys and utilize enterprise risk as a planning and resource allocation tool, just not to show of the doomsday scenarios. No, that's not the intent, right? So this way, what I have seen in my experience is when you kind of work with them this way and know help others better understand why certain things went not did not go as expected, right? They come back to you when they're considering their assumptions for the next leg. Now they come back to you when there is another big project coming up. They come back to you when there is going to be a regulatory change, and you kind of start partnering with them, and that's that's a great win. And the next step in that is they kind of worked with you for so long that when they think about certain things, they're already thinking through the risk framework that you have built. So now I heard one of my peers talk say that now when business leaders are thinking about risk when risk is not in the room, that's a great win for us. And this is that incremental continuum work that you kind of work along with the business to kind of achieve that. It's not a project, and this needs to be consistently done. It's not like you do it once and then no, it will go on its own. It doesn't work that way. It's no, you need to keep working on it.
No, and I love that it's not just something you do once. So, and that kind of gets into the whole annual risk assessment and thinking, we're good, we've identified the
Yeah.
risks. No, 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 no. For so many reasons that we don't have time to get into today.
Yeah.
But So to support that and to go back to an earlier comment, which was the communications with the board. So I recently published an article talking about the ideal of how it should look for ERM and their communications with the board. Being where in the full board, ERM should not be presenting, and it should be the business talking about their work that they're doing, and here are the risks,
Hmm.
positive and not so positive, things to what's going on. Here are the things that we're doing to address some of them. We've recognized that some of these are going to be outside of our control, but we are monitoring, right? So they're giving their own report out, but ERM isn't standing in front of the board talking. This is showing the business with ERM support behind the scenes that yes, the business has recognized that these things can happen. Here are the actions that we're taking, and everything's good. Now, you've had a slightly different experience where it wasn't quite to that point. Can you describe that for everybody?
Absolutely. I would say, no, what you just described is the ideal. I think that would be one of the more matured model where business is able to articulate both their objectives as well as risk to the board by themselves, right? Well, that's a great win for every risk practitioner. But now what we used to do is now business will present its plan to the board independently. And ERM used to go to the full board because we always used to think that now risk and strategy are two sides of the same coin. So when business is talking about strategy on how what they're going to do, how they're going to go about doing it, then risk goes and presents to the full board, where our opening comment is this is the plan as you have heard from the business. These are all the risks that we have identified and know how, and these are all the drivers that we are monitoring and we will be measuring as we go about executing this plan. And this is the range of how likely we are going to achieve that business given the current set of assumptions in terms of resource allocation. And our confidence level is so much in achieving the plan this way for these reasons. And we kind of quantify, run our models to present that. And then we talk about the tail, both ends of the tail, in terms of where we think things could go well, where we think things could not go well. And we kind of create an expected threshold on when we will come to the board when we breach certain limits. Right. So kind of the board understands that this is the strategy. These are all the functions who are going to be executing these things. And these are the risk associated with each of those. And these are the limits that they will be reporting on. And we expect to hear back when things kind of breach either way. So, and when I started, we used to do this annual assessments, and then over a period of time, I consciously moved away from it because business doesn't happen annually. Right. So that's the reason we set these limits. So no, it kind of is a continuous process now. So whenever, and then it's difficult from a governance perspective because you have set board agenda items that you want to discuss, but then we kind of build that now ability to present certain things when things are going either too well or things are not going well, to kind of now talk to both the leadership and to the board about it. So we kind of moved away from ERM being an annual exercise and being more of a continuous exercise.
Which is exactly how it should be, because you're right, the business does not work on an annual cycle.
Hmm.
It is a continuously moving, shifting thing. And so ERM needs to be shifting with it.
Right.
And the work that we do should be shifting with it. Which also means the outputs of what we do should be shifting with
Exactly.
it as well.
Right.
So, okay. Um, so based on all of that, I think we've given a really great framework for how practitioners, ERM practitioners, and even to be honest, strategy people should be talking with leaders. And there's no reason why it can only be ERM, but primarily it will likely be um, your enterprise risk management people talking to leaders to ask the challenging questions. And I'm actually down below going to provide some links to here are some questions that you can ask your leaders to really kind of gain some insights into what they're thinking
Hmm.
without just being, please don't ask them the question of what keeps you up at night.
Yeah.
Please
Yes.
don't. Please don't, because that adds no value to the conversation, right? So, I've actually, somebody actually asked me that one time. I said, actually, nothing keeps me up at night. I sleep very well.
Right.
So, if that were my ruler for, what risk exists, then obviously I don't have any because nothing keeps me up.
Yeah.
So, but I know that's not the case. So, let's not ask that question, guys. Um, so we'll provide some links to everybody to give them some tools in the toolkit for how to look at risks, for sure, both internal and external.
Hmm.
Uh, is there anything else as we wrap up, Karthik, that you would like to add? Or a big takeaway that you think people should get that you want to emphasize?
I would say like risk is as much as now, let me put it this way. So there are hard skills, technical skills to kind of do ERM depending on how complex the business is, the nature of the business. But equally important is the soft skill part of it. Like now, how do you work along with people? How do you kind of tweak your style or strategy and how you engage depending on your stakeholders' style, right? And how do you gain a seat in the table by making providing that value to your decision makers? I would say the primary stakeholder for enterprise risk management function or the business leaders, right? Not the board, not the regulator. All that comes later. It's the people whom you work with, mostly your peers, your higher ups. And the success is when they think through, they are thoughtful about risk, they understand your framework, and they talk about their business goals while kind of attaching to the risk concepts or the risk framework that you have built. That's a great win. And Rome was not built in a day, so this doesn't happen overnight. But there are great tools, great resources. Like now, Carol, now you kind of always champion doing risk management the right way. And now this, we should move beyond using risk management as a compliance tool and use that as a strategic decision making tool. And I think Carol has named a firm the great way as well. So no, thank you, Carol, for doing this. I'm really glad that I could share some thoughts about it. And do reach out if you want to talk more about it. And Carol is a great resource. She keeps no, I love reading the articles that you post and rereading the articles that you post, actually. So,
Well,
kind of
thank you so much, Karthik. And for everybody else, I completely agree. Soft skills are so, so critical. So down below, I will also post some links to some of our uh, most visited, most viewed soft skill articles for people because it is so important. As much as we think, I need to get that certificate in ERM, I need to go do all that stuff. It's the soft skills that'll get you. It doesn't matter how good of a process person you are if you're
right.
not a good soft skills. So thank you for that point, Karthik. Um, Okay, so yes, we will have, I'm sure, another conversation on this.
Absolutely.
But in the meantime, thank you so much for joining me again today. Always enjoy our conversations.
Likewise. Thank you.